To that note, reinventing yourself, industry disruption, career disruption 2.0, that was kind of his niche last week. We're going to build upon that a little bit this week, but we're going to kind of take a little bit of a different avenue. We're going to look at technology disruption today. We're going to talk also about what it means to be a leader in the midst of technology disruption, what it means to be accountable, what it means to have perseverance, and to know how to go ahead and innovate in situations that otherwise do not naturally present themselves to innovation, okay? Why are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that because we've got a guest here today who could not be more well-positioned to speak on those topics. He has been a leading mind behind the integration of pioneering technologies into the world's largest bureaucracies. Think about the weird skill set that you have to be able to do that. That is a unique person. That's pretty amazing. He's been a strategist overseeing a $125 billion budget, larger than anybody I have by far ever had in this class or that we would know. He's been the leader of a globally distributed workforce of over 900,000 people. That's beyond imagination. And lo and behold, he's also a teacher here in the College of Engineering, professor of practice. His expertise has been sought across the globe, not just here in this country, but by those all across the globe who are leading in the face of crisis and conflict. He's here today to share lessons on leadership and implementing change and the power of disruptive technologies. He's returning to the campus where he earned his master's and PhD. And before we introduce him, I also want to give a warm welcome to some of our ROTC members here and anyone who has served and is serving. Please help me welcome our good friend, Mr. Don Winter.
Oh, thank you, and good morning. I think it is still morning here. Look, let me try to go through and tell you a little bit about myself before I start talking about some of the things that I've learned. As you just heard, my wife and I actually moved here to Ann Arbor 54 years ago. And I was a student here. Did my dissertation work across the street, literally, at what used to be called Willow Run Laboratories. We had offices on campus as well as at the Air Base. And I was part of what was known as the Radar and Optics Division. Had a great opportunity to work there under Emmett Leith and Peter Franken, and learned quite a bit, I thought, about what it meant to do research and development. I went from there out to the West Coast to a place called TRW. Those of you who know something about automotive would know TRW Auto Parts and all of that, Rochester carburetors and all things. It was actually the combination of Thompson Products and Ramo Wooldridge. Ramo Wooldridge was a company formed by Cy Ramo and Dean Wooldridge to help develop the intercontinental ballistic missile. And they became a leader in space systems, space technology, and actually the facility in Redondo Beach, California, included the first facilities ever built specifically to produce satellites. I spent 8 years there before I wound up getting a call to go back to Washington to become a program manager at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And it was an interesting opportunity, if you will, to go from doing R&D to overseeing R&D and understanding how research and development fit into the military and into the Department of Defense. Very interesting opportunity to understand the other side of the table, so to say, when you talk about sellers and buyers. I actually went back to TRW in Redondo Beach, spent a number of years there in a variety of roles. Most of my roles at that time involved systems engineering, and became a program systems engineer for major activities. Later on, took on the responsibility of program management and eventually executive management as well. Went from there. TRW sent me back to Washington to run an organization called TRW Systems Group, which wound up getting bought by Northrop Grumman. And so I kind of talk about my career as being kind of a split there between the cultures of TRW and the cultures of Northrop Grumman, which are quite a bit different, if you will. You might ask, how did I go from being president of a major defense contractor like TRW, Northrop Grumman, to being Secretary of the Navy? And I'll keep this pretty short, but when I was running Systems Group, we had 16,000 people spread out all over the world. I had about 4,000 people in the Middle East, and with that group of people in the Middle East, I had 3 attacks by Al-Qaeda that killed 11 of my employees and wounded 60 additional, including family members. At that point in time, it became evident to me that I couldn't stay focused on sales, profit, and cash flow, which my boss told me that I was responsible to do because, hell, I was running a $6 billion a year business, and Wall Street needed to know what was going on. So I made my willingness to serve known, and next thing I knew, I was sitting in with Don Rumsfeld and had an interesting conversation with him. He asked what I was looking to do, and I said whatever I could do to help. And make a long story short, a few weeks later, I got a call asking me whether I wanted to be Secretary of the Navy. I will say a very fascinating period of time, very demanding, both technically but more so emotionally, because that was a time period where we had conflict in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and I was dealing with significant numbers of casualties and the families of those who had fallen. I left the Pentagon in '09. I actually stayed on a few months in the Obama administration at the request of the Secretary to help with the transition and with some budgetary matters. And then in my second failed retirement, by the way, I consider this my 4th failed retirement. But at this point, in my second failed retirement, Dave Munson approached me and asked me whether or not I wanted to be a professor of practice up here. He wanted me to move here. I couldn't quite move here because of some of the other things I was involved in. But I did commute up here for a number of years and taught courses on systems engineering and safety and maritime policy. And I thought that was a great opportunity to engage in. And I also served 2 other governments. I've been supporting the Australian government, and in particular the Royal Australian Navy, in their rebuild of the fleet. And I served as an advisor to the Prime Minister in Australia, and also tried to help out in Ukraine in terms of modernizing the Ukrainian defense industry. Okay, so some of you have got to be thinking, what does this have to do with entrepreneurial activities? And sure, it doesn't look like an entrepreneur's career. And hell, I'm not even wearing a black T-shirt, okay? I ditched the tie. I thought that would be, appropriate, but, no black T-shirt. Well, I'll take the following position. First of all, virtually everything I've done has been involved with the insertion of new technology into major systems for government work, and in particular for defense activities. In addition to being a developer of technology, and in particular disruptive technologies, when both I was at DARPA and when I was Secretary of the Navy, I was heavily involved in the acquisition of new technologies and disruptive technologies. So I have a sense of what really goes on in terms of disruptive technologies from the standpoint of the DoD and other similar organizations on a worldwide basis. Why might this matter to you? We need it. We need advanced technologies, disruptive technologies to help support the defense of the free world. We need it, Australia needs it, Ukraine needs it. The Brits need it, the French need it. It's essential. And oh, by the way, there are companies that have done this very well, and as a result of that, have made out financially quite nicely. So there's a real opportunity here for those of you who have an entrepreneurial bent and have technologies to offer that would be of interest to the military, to the DoD. Now, I have to warn you, though, it's different. It's not like selling a new technology to GM or Apple or going out on the commercial market on your own. Making change in the military is a real challenge. It's a real challenge because, well, first of all, it's a bureaucracy. It's a big organization. And oh, by the way, for those of you who have studied organizational behavior and the like, it's actually a complex matrix organization with multi-level matrices, which basically means many people have responsibilities and many people can actually say no. There's a whole set of prescriptive aspects about how we operate, but the bottom line is that there are many people that can make a decision and too many people can say no. Making change is different, okay? Why is change difficult? Besides that many people can say no, the acquisition process is a long, long process. The money has to be appropriated. The whole appropriations process. Anybody here following what's going on in Washington right now? How many years has it been that we've had a proper defense budget that's been passed and agreed to? And oh, by the way, there's both what's called authorization and appropriations. Authorization sets the policy. Appropriation provides the money to implement that policy. It's difficult. One of the other problems that you have is that change typically what we call cascades. It's a term we use. I used to use it when I taught systems engineering here. What that means is one change impacts other changes or necessitates other changes. You can't just make one simple change. One of the examples that I've used, and I don't want to get into all the technical details here, but the new radars that we're putting onto U.S. surface ships. They're almost the same exact size as the old radars. And so if you look at just the nice PowerPoint drawings, it looks like it all should fit real nicely. It's just like a foot and a half here and a foot there. And when you take a look at it, what has to happen to accommodate that new radar means that roughly half of the compartments on the ship have to be modified in one way or another. It's just the way the changes cascade through the entire process. There are issues with doctrine, which is how do you structure the forces and how do you use the forces? And there's a whole set of cultures. And in this regard, I will just assert that the services all differ quite a bit. You go and take a look at the Air Force. Anybody want to take a guess at what the senior Air Force officer, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, what his background is? Take a guess. What do you think? Is he a pilot? He's a fighter pilot. always has been, always will be. There's a hierarchy within the Air Force: fighter pilots, bomber pilots, transport pilots, okay? One of the reasons we put together a Space Force. Space geeks didn't rank within the Air Force structure at all. So when you go into the Air Force and you say, I've got an aircraft and it doesn't require a pilot, what type of reception do you think you get? It's a little bit difficult, a little bit different than the Navy, and I'll get into that. And then you've got all the vested interests that show up. One of the classical problems is that people say we can't take the risk of new technology. And part of the problem is that you're dealing with major developments, major production. The U.S. maintains 11 carriers. That's it. This is not a mass production job. There's only one place in the United States that you can build a carrier, okay? It's Newport News in Virginia. And we build them over many, many years. It takes time, and the idea is you want to be always building one carrier. Well, when it came to the Ford class, my apologies, it was time to do a refresh of the technology. And there was a debate within the Pentagon as to whether we should do change incrementally or whether we should do all the changes for the first of class. And the changes included everything from the nuclear power plant to the basic layout of the flight deck, the elevators that are used to move the aircraft around, and most significantly, the catapults that are used to launch the aircraft. If you're not familiar with it, aircraft can't take off on a really, really short runway without a little bit of help. And the way we've been doing this for many years is we use steam-driven catapults that basically take the aircraft and give it a good push and get it going at a speed so that it's able to get airborne. There's a problem with steam-driven catapults. Anyone know what's worse in terms of a maintenance point of view than steel and salt water? It's steel, salt water, and steam. And the combination of those three means you've got rust and corrosion going crazy. So many years ago, people decided we needed to convert to a new technology, and that new technology is called EMALS, Electromagnetic Air Launch System, basically using a linear electric motor to push the aircraft. Great idea. Run a competition, great technology. Next thing I know, I am responsible for the development and production of this carrier, and that new technology is on the critical path. What does it mean to be on the critical path? It's pacing the entire development. Too many problems. Basically, a contractor that didn't really understand what it meant to build hardware for use at sea. And quite frankly, a little bit of a stretch too far in terms of the technical maturity of the design that was being embedded within a major development. We finally got through it. This very beautiful aircraft carrier is on station in the Mediterranean, supporting U.S. interests in the far eastern end of the Mediterranean. But it took several additional years and several million, if not billion dollars additional cost, and put at risk our ability to maintain the 11 carrier fleet. It's for these reasons people are really nervous about inserting technology. That doesn't mean it can't happen. And what I've seen is that if you've got a good technology, I call it a disruptive technology, and you have solid engineering. What does that mean? You can't just go in with we used to use the term golden gaga. the great little new technology, the nice little computer chip, or the nice new electromagnetic air launch system, and just say, I got the technology, let's go. You got to show that you can engineer it, that that technology can provide the service that you need, that it can be sustained and supported in an appropriate manner. You've got to be able to demonstrate the value added. If you do all of that, you can make a successful change. By the way, one point that I try to make for every audience like this that I talk to is you're going to fail. It isn't going to work the first time. You may be at iteration, this didn't show up quite the way I'd hoped, N, where N can be a large number. Don't give up. If you really believe in what you're doing, you may have to try multiple times before you have a successful technology insertion, before you have a successful program and a customer that's really willing to buy from you and use it on an ongoing basis. Often, it's the operational need that really helps motivate things going on. And one of the examples I would like to use for you today is one that I was involved in when I was secretary. It's called Scan Eagle. I don't know if any of you have heard about that, but it's a tactical reconnaissance unmanned aerial vehicle that was adopted, I say adopted, and I'll explain why I use that term in a moment, by the Marine Corps in Iraq. It was actually developed by a team. In situ is actually a small company that knew nothing whatsoever about the Defense Department, let alone the Marine Corps. And they did some interesting developments before they got involved with the Marines. In situ was formed in '94. By the way, the company refers to Ted McGeer as a garage inventor. So I thought I'd use that term here. I mean, that was really the size of the company. It was a couple of guys getting together, playing with toy airplanes and trying to make something out of it. Their first idea, they thought that if they could get a UAV that would have enough range, they could use it for long-range weather forecasting, going out and going over the Atlantic and finding out what was really happening in detail, more so than depending upon satellites, that they'd be able to do something. And they designed and built this thing called Aerosonde. And it was developed with a company in Australia and also with the University of Washington. It has one remarkable record. It was the first transatlantic flight of a UAV. No pilots. By the way, interesting, this is the launch. Anyone see something unusual about this launch? Oh, come on. There's a car here, for crying out loud. The hell's a UAV doing on a car? Well, it winds up that to make it all the way across the Atlantic, you need really, really good fuel efficiency, right? Which means you need to be really, really light, and you need to be really, really aerodynamic, which means you can't have any landing gear. Okay? If you had fixed gear, wheels and struts, okay, that would spoil the aerodynamics, add a little bit of weight. If you tried to do a retractable landing gear, that would add a lot more weight. And so they came up with the idea that, yeah, they'll put it on top of a car, run the car at reasonable high speed on the highway, let the UAV off, and it would go across the Atlantic based on GPS. And when it hit in Scotland or came in close, there would be a team waiting for it. They would take it under control. and they do basically a skid landing. Hey, this is incredible. This is the Charles Lindbergh of the UAV world. What's the problem with it? Come on, people.
Don't be afraid to fail. You can say the wrong answer. Put something out there.
What's the business model here? How many people are really going to be interested in buying one of these? How many are you going to be able to produce? By the way, they lost the first 2 of these. Okay? Remember what I said about failure and keeping on? Really hard. Well, ScanEagle was based on a next generation. Their next generation, after they did the Aerosonde, was called C-Scan. And here they decided they needed to first identify a target market and then design something for the market, as opposed to designing for a record. And the market that they decided to support was the tuna fishing industry. Now, I don't expect many of you to know much about tuna fishing, but the bottom line is this is a small boat that goes out into the ocean and tries to find the schools of tuna. You can't see very far from a small boat. So the idea is that if you could launch a UAV from the boat and recover it later on, you might be able to use that UAV to find the tuna. I'll show you later the way they launched and recovered it. It's kind of a very, very creative way of doing things. And they were fortunate because after 2001 and 9/11, they decided they might also want to take a look at military applications. And being headquartered up in Washington, they naturally got together with Boeing, which owns the state of Washington in certain aspects. And together they put together the ScanEagle, which was deployed in Iraq in 2004 initially. And it provided some really nifty capabilities for the Marines. And oh, by the way, do the Marines have the same problem that the Air Force has? They always headed by a fighter pilot? Actually, in the history of the Marine Corps, there's only one commandant of the Marine Corps that was a pilot. It was Jim Amos. I know him well, a great guy. Every other commandant has been what we call a mud Marine, okay? And they're interested in just one thing, winning the fight, getting into the fight, winning the fight, and they needed help. They needed help to see what was going on around them. And because of what was happening in Iraq at the time, and the fact that the Marines had taken total responsibility for the province of Al-Anbar, they realized they had to do it themselves. They couldn't depend upon others. So they took this on, and they tried it in Al-Assad. And let me see if we can...
A bird whose beginnings included looking for schools of tuna and tracking the weather has found its way to the desert. With a few modifications, this fish finder is now a military intelligence asset. The Marine Corps is currently the only service testing the unmanned aerial vehicle, or UAV, better known as ScanEagle.
Marine Corps went out looking for something and found this aircraft. They said, hey, let's put a camera in this thing and send it to war and see if we can take pictures and help out the fight over there. And that's what we're doing. That's why I've got mostly contractors working for my team from the companies. And we've put it in the air, and I've got a couple of Marines that work for me, and we do some good imagery for the guys on the ground and give them some good feedback, real-time imagery, and let them know what's going on.
The aircraft starts collecting video minutes after it's airborne. It's the job of imagery analyst Sergeant Scott Cumston to interpret that information.
Basically, what I do is I look at the pictures. I look at the pictures from the battle space, and I talk to the troops and the commanders back in the rear and out in the field, and let them know exactly what's going on down there, and let them know exactly what's the best way that they could use the battle space to their advantage.
Scan Eagle is smaller and quieter than other UAVs, but one of the program's better qualities is the speed at which the information gets to the people who need it.
The Scan Eagle is a more user-friendly platform. The operators can talk directly with the troops on the ground, with the battlefield commanders and the intelligence sections of the supported units, which makes it very handy. I've gotten a lot of feedback from the supported units that say that they love the Scan Eagle a lot more because of that user interface. It's got more time on station, and we can stay in the air as long as they need us and give them some good coverage.
Its ability is proven during combat operations in Fallujah and along the Euphrates during Operation River Blitz. Captain Weiss believes there's potential for Scan Eagle to be effective in other areas.
Watch the
I see
recovery.
this as, with a whole lot of capabilities. We could use it for force protection around bases. You could use it for escorting convoys, looking for route reconnaissance for convoys. Forward air controllers have been able to use this thing to try to control fires. It's really a great asset.
The 1st Marine Expeditionary Force deployed the UAV to Iraq in the summer of 2004 and surpassed more than 1,000 flight hours by November. From Al Asad Air Base, I'm Army Sergeant Casey Nelson for the Multinational Corps Iraq Public Affairs Office.
Yeah, it's kind of a nifty capture. It just gets caught on the wing. There's a hook on the wing, and it does the very close proximity very accurately using a differential GPS system that enables it to be recovered and also supports recovery at sea when needed. This system has evolved quite nicely. It is now kind of a standard product. It's called the Blackjack RQ-21A, and it's now being employed by a large number of nations, including actually Ukraine, one of the countries we've given it to. And, oh, by the way, now In Situ has gone back to commercial products also, selling to ConocoPhillips. And I probably should note that it's In Situ is now a subsidiary of Boeing. So in that acquisition, and Boeing spent a few $100 million on In Situ, trust me, the people that formed In Situ came out financially quite well. One last chart I want to use here just to talk about insertion in major systems. I don't want to leave you with the impression with the Ford discussion that it's impossible to insert technology into major platforms. One of the activities I was involved in supporting Australia had to do with a company called CEA. CEA is a small company located actually in Canberra, Australia, near the center of government there. And they developed some phased array radars. And those phased array radars actually are very nifty devices. They solved many of the problems that have been making it difficult to put phased array radars on ships. And they also recognize one other factor. The Australian government has been investing a lot of money in shipbuilding, and most of that money has gone to foreign countries. The Brits, the French, the United States, all of that. And they were, quite frankly, somewhat desperate for some indigenous product development. And so what happened here is that over many years, starting out in 1983 and going to the point where they actually started to insert this technology into the frigates that Australia has, they were able to get very good support from the Australian government simply because they wanted it. In this particular case, I will tell you that, yes, they wanted it, but they also got a very, very good product. And I think this also is an example of when you get good technology with good engineering and a real need, you can be very, very successful. By the way, the company now has been bought out by the Australian government, which is kind of an unusual situation. And I'll just say it would only happen in Australia. Let me modify that. It would only happen in an Australian government, Labor government, which is what we have right now. So Look, I think I'll cut it at that point and see if there's any questions or where we want to go from here.
Yeah, we can have a conversation. Thank you, Don.
Okay.
Appreciate the education. Thank you for the rundown on all of that. As you're talking about disruptive technology, solid engineering, and then need, let's talk about need for a second here. How can students out there today, when they're thinking about the Department of Defense or the defense industry at large as being a potential customer of a startup that they might want to form, how can they understand what those operational needs are?
Now, that's a real challenge, and I think one of the points I would like to try to make is that go back to the history on Scan Eagle between In Situ and Boeing. And In Situ had some interesting technology, and they had kind of an inclination that in particular after 9/11 and all the engagement in Iraq and Afghanistan, that there might be some way that they could help out. But they knew enough that they knew what they didn't know, and they were willing to partner up with somebody who did know, and that was Boeing. And so I think part of what I'm trying to get to here is that it's really very important to recognize what you know and what you don't know. All too often, the entrepreneurial organizations have the great technology, but with few individuals that have the experience on the application side. Now, CEA was an alternative example where Ian came from the Royal Australian Navy and he had that experience. And he had been an engineer with their Navy for many years. But I think that the name of the game here is to be willing to be flexible. Don't sit there holding your cards very close to your chest and say, hey, I don't want to share this with anybody else. I want to make all the money myself, and I want to be the prime contractor and all of that. I think that in many cases, developing the partnerships, developing the relationships, understanding how to work with other companies to address different markets is key to being able to make the sale.
To the point of making the sale, you had mentioned the complex matrix organization that the defense industry and the defense departments can be, and how many opportunities there are for someone to say no, or otherwise shut down the deal that's being discussed and negotiated. Is it critical to otherwise have multiple operational needs met or touched when you're trying to implement a technology or sale?
Let's see. In many cases, there's just one need. Okay? But if it's important enough, it can justify a new technology. And the question is, what is the value added that this technology provides? And if that value added is enough to offset all the risks and concerns about adopting a new technology, people will go ahead with it. Some cases, I would say, like in the case with the carrier and the electromagnetic launch system, we probably pushed that a little bit too fast. And one of the reasons I talk about solid engineering is one of the challenges we've had on carrier and other programs is recognizing the need for ensuring the ability to sustain the equipment over the lifetime that you're looking to get out of it. One of the problems you have at sea is that all the equipment is going to be maintained by enlisted sailors. Average age between 18 and 22 years old, with no college degrees and limited technical training. How do you develop hardware so that it can be maintained by those individuals? That's the type of challenge we deal with.
I'm thinking about a student out here who's going to go become a founder and says, hey, I see this operational need within the industry. I have a technology. I've worked it out so that there's really solid engineering here. I'm now going to go to Boeing. I'm going to go to TRW. I'm going to go to Northrop. I'm going to go partner with someone who understands it and the complexities enough, who can help me get to done and get kind of through on this. How do they protect what they have enough to where it doesn't just become consumed by the organization that they're trying to partner by?
Well, I will say that's in general a problem. I've seen that. There's been a lot of press about that lately with IT companies having their intellectual property stolen by Apple, I think, is one of the individual corporations that's been accused of doing such things. I think that in the defense industry, because it's a highly regulated industry and it operates under very complex strictures by the U.S. government, that most defense companies know how to deal with the problem. And yes, it's a matter of setting up the proper teaming agreements, and you want to have your own lawyer doing that, representing you, but they're used to it. And they should be able to protect you in the long term. And whether or not you agree to show them the technology for a specific target, acquisition target, or for a specific military department or a specific application, those are different alternatives, and they can all be called out for in the same type of a teaming agreement.
So if you had to give them the tip for how you detect bullshit most, what is the tip that they need to walk out of here going, okay, now I know?
What you got to do is you got to gauge the people that are talking to you, and gauge the individuals. Learn what you can, who you can trust and who you have to really question about, and ask the tough questions. One of the things I did when I first took office in the Pentagon, I think it was the first or second week, somebody came in and gave me a briefing on a program, and I started asking questions, and they were not in a position to answer it. So I threw them out of my office. Not a behavior that's typical in the Pentagon, but what I wanted to do is to convey the message that, hey, if you're going to come in here and talk to me about a program or a problem or whatever, I want to have somebody here who can really talk from the position of knowledge and understanding of what was really going on, not somebody who is put up as a professional briefer or what have you. And if you can figure that out, ask the tough questions. My father used to tell me, always ask good questions. And if you ask good questions, you'll find out not just the answer to that question, but the answers to the questions you should have asked.
Can't think of a better way to wrap it. I'm sorry you didn't get time for questions, but bring them on up to the stage. Thank you, Don. Have a great weekend. And I would have to imagine part of all of that is the notion of being able to build trusted relationships with the individuals you're working with, be it with the partners, with the eventual client in the defense industry, or whoever it might be. If you don't mind, if I can ask you to do a little storytelling about when you got your appointment to become the Secretary of the Navy and kind of what was asked of you for your role.
Oh, gee whiz.
Yeah. He doesn't know I was going to ask him that, but it's too good of a story not to tell.
Okay, can I give the unexpurgated version of
Absolutely.
it? Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, I had a very good session with Don Rumsfeld when he was Secretary of Defense. And he said, yeah, he wanted me and all of that. But, oh, by the way, I had to go through the formal process with the White House and everything. So next thing I know, I get a call. I have to go to the White House and go through a White House personnel interview. So I go over there, and half a dozen people around the table. And for about an hour, hour and a half, they're peppering me with a bunch of questions. And I must have answered them reasonably well because I eventually did get the job. But at the end of that, one of the individuals turned to me and said, hey, you've been very good with your time and with your answers. We've been asking all the questions. Do you have a question of us? And I said, well, I guess I do. I said, I know what the responsibilities of the Secretary are as they're part of the U.S. Code, Title 10, yada, 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 all of that stuff. But what do you want me to do as a member of the administration, as a representative of from the White House? And he said, oh, that's real simple. I said, really? He said, yeah, we want you to be a bullshit detector, which took me a little bit aghast. It was like, whoa, what do you mean? And he said, well, we don't know what to believe and what to trust when we get information from the Pentagon. And made me think a little bit, and I have to tell you that when I got into the building and started doing my role, I realized what they were talking about, because there was, how do I say it, less than a complete disclosure of all of the challenges in front of us. And by the way, I found a very similar situation when I was working with the Australian government, and the difference between their Department of Defense and the cabinet there, and a lot of uncertainty about whether or not the cabinet and Parliament in general were really getting the total story from the Defense Department. So what does this mean? Well, what it means is that there's a huge value, if you will, for being honest. That may sound a little crazy, but it really is very important. I will just tell you that everybody who tried to play games that I was involved with, their careers wound up getting shortened very considerably, okay? It did not work out well for them. Being open, being honest, dealing with the problems, not coming forward with every little issue here and there, but answering the questions fully and properly is a very, very critical part of a successful career.